can see from the title, today's video is about passivity and indecision. And I've been reflecting on this a lot lately because I've started this channel, obviously, and I'm trying to be proactive. I'm trying to be anything and everything that's the opposite of either passive or indecisive. I'm trying to make decisions, I'm trying to make changes, I'm trying to move forward, and I'm trying to put myself back out into the world, and hopefully that will be something that's positive and generative and that might help other people. This might be a two-parter actually, passivity and indecision. I've thought about this a lot, and I've thought about the effect of these things, these concepts, these structures on my life and the hurdle that they've been for me. So anyone following this channel and anyone tuning into the upcoming podcast, which is coming out this Sunday, that's the Barrow podcast that I'm doing with my mum. People following along, you guys might already know that I'm writing a memoir with my mum. I moved home a few years ago, and we were really not close with each other. Mum was a single mum to me. I'm an only child, but we weren't close. We were bonded in a way, but we weren't close. We didn't have a relationship. Because we didn't know how to communicate with one another. So as a result of circumstances in my family life, I found myself in a rather unusual situation growing up. I was raised in a multi-generational household. So I grew up with my mum and my maternal grandparents, so mum's mum and dad. But within that dynamic, my grandparents became more like my parents, and my parents became more like siblings. Mum was really like a big sister, and my father, who had left me when I was 3 years old, well, just before I turned 3, he really wasn't even like a sibling. He was kind of like a distant cousin, or even, I was saying this to someone the other day, that he was kind of like a kind of like black sheep of the family uncle. Like a really dodgy uncle. Kind of that guy that you would see show up at family occasions, and people would be like, yeah, that's your Uncle Jim. Yeah, no, we don't lend him money anymore, So he was kind of that to me. But within this environment, my grandparents were like super controlling, which is something I think I've raised on other videos before. I think there was a vlog where I was kind of like, I don't know, just having a bad day, and I was sort of venting about my grandfather being really controlling. And my grandmother was the same. Really interfering, really controlling, always present. And because my parents' divorce had been really bad, really spectacularly bad, and because I was an only child, a lot of attention got directed at me. So mum and I ended up moving in with her parents, and they sort of just gave up on life. Like they gave up on living their own lives. So they didn't have any, retirement plans or anything. They just sort of took to taking me and my mother in, which was great at first, but it just turned into this really bad dynamic between the between the four of us, sorry. I'm thinking mum and her parents, the three of them, and me. I sort of became this weird project for them to occupy themselves with at a later stage in life. Mum went back to work, and then they were just kind of always around. So in that environment, Mum and I were not given the opportunity to just move on with our lives. We had these people in our lives present all the time. And like I say, it sort of shifted the dynamic around, so that my grandparents became my parents, and mum became like this big sister who was mostly at work. And because mum was so passive and deferring herself, my grandparents became this constant pressure in my life. And I never really learned any lessons about boundaries as a result, right? So mum's message, what she was modeling to me, was to always comply with her parents. And even though this made me super uncomfortable, I really just learned to suppress my discomfort and go along with things because there were no other alternatives. I didn't have an older brother or sister challenging or questioning the dynamics in our household, and nor did I have a younger sibling looking to me to do that. And I didn't have anyone in the way of siblings to cross-check things with. So I couldn't turn to anyone and say, hey, doesn't this seem a bit weird to you? Do you feel like things are a little bit off here? And that is truly one of the great curses of being an only child, is that you don't have anyone to kind of like read off of or use as a soundboard. Hey, did you pick up on mum's kind of feeling this way? Or hey, don't you think it's weird how dad does blah, blah, blah? That's a very isolating experience. And even in the best of circumstances, being an only child can be quite an isolating and lonely experience. And in my case, that was compounded by the fact that this dynamic was a little bit off and there was no one to go to. So I couldn't really go to my mum because she would always kind of side with her own parents. And I couldn't go to my father because my father didn't want to be in my life. And to be perfectly honest, the experiences I'd had with my father taught me that I couldn't count on him for anything. I couldn't trust him. The experiences I had with my father, who I only saw once every other weekend as a child, those experiences, even though I would see him for only, what was it, maybe 32 hours, it wasn't a full day and a half. It was like 10 a.m. Saturday through to 3 p.m. Sunday. And in that time, my experiences could be so horrendous that I just felt really, I was deathly afraid of my father. And I didn't want to be around him. I certainly didn't want to ask him for advice. We never had that kind of relationship. And, I've been estranged from him since I was 18, 19, I want to say. As soon as I didn't have to do access visits with him, I never saw him again, pretty much. I think I saw him a couple of occasions. There was a very brief window of time where I attempted to form some kind of relationship with him and the life he was living, but it just made me feel uncomfortable. I wasn't ready at that point in my life. So anyway, this all built up in me. It became this kind of internal pressure cooker for me. There was without any outlet. So there was no emotional support or guidance in my life. There was no one to go to. And really all I was left with was a role that I needed to fulfill, which was to play the part of this kind of perfect grandson. Like, I needed to be the silver lining to people's problems. So I needed to be successful to kind of make up for my parents' terrible divorce and for the sacrifices my grandparents had made by accommodating mum and I into their lives. And it was really dehumanizing. I often felt really just like an object. My experiences and the dynamic of the household I grew up in and the dynamic of our situation, the result was I felt stripped of agency. And I also knew inherently that all my relationships were conditional. There was a great amount of pressure on me to perform, like I say, to make up for the parents' divorce, to make up for the sacrifices, to make up for mum going back to work. I needed to be successful. And part of that was complying with the whims of my grandparents, which were seemingly never ending. Especially in the case of my grandmother, like, you know, looking back, it seems she probably had, I mean, it's impossible to diagnose somebody with an illness retroactively, and actually you shouldn't even attempt to do it. From my own diagnosis and based on all the literature I've ever read and knowing this woman inside and out and spending countless hours interviewing mum, talking about my grandmother, and writing about her and writing about our family, it would seem to me that she would have had, I believe, some kind of personality disorder, whether a borderline personality disorder or not antisocial, but I think borderline is a diagnosis that, and we'll get to my diagnosis at a later point on the channel, but it really is something that I'm comfortable applying to her. There's just I saw evidence of so many of the symptoms, and being that that's a diagnosis I was given, I feel like I'm pretty well positioned to say, yeah, I can see how maybe that was her experience of the world. But in the case of my grandmother, you know, when I was a child, I was kind of like a doll to her. You know, I wasn't a person. I was a sort of a plaything, something that she occupied her time with. And this kind of strange concoction of dynamics and individuals and undiagnosed mental health and untreated mental health problems that existed between us, it resulted in a situation where, through really bad modeling about boundaries and decision making and standing your ground, and really bad modeling around compliance and enmeshment. So the nature of the dynamics, especially between my mother and her parents, was that they were enmeshed, which is a term in psychology that you must look up. It resulted in a situation where, and again, because I didn't have any let off, I couldn't go talk to anyone. It just resulted in a situation where the best thing for me to do was to just comply. I felt like I didn't have a choice. And everything was chosen for me. My clothes, what hobbies I was gonna like and take on, how I spent my time, where I spent my time, how I cut my hair, what friends I had, where I was at all times. It was like being under constant surveillance. And I've referred to the property itself, being like sometimes I think of it was like a prison, and then other times I call it a compound. Like we were a cult living on a compound, and it was very cultish the way we lived together, and had these entrenched shared values. It was very hard to move around. I was under constant surveillance. There were always eyes on me, and I was chaperoned everywhere. My grandfather wouldn't allow me to take public transport to school, so he drove me, and it was just sort of like you couldn't get away from anyone. There was no healthy boundaries. And for me, as a boy and as a male adolescent and then a young man, this was all very emasculating as well. Masculinity is about sort of asserting yourself and showing strength and all sorts of stuff. And there was really no room for me to do that, and suppressing my impulses and desires and all the rest of it in order to survive also made me feel very ashamed of myself as a man, as a male. And I would always experience people being like, schoolmates at the time, and then people later saying like, why didn't you rebel? Why didn't you stand up for yourself? And the answer is because I couldn't. You have no idea what it's like to live in a house where people are living almost inside of you. It's like they have a hand inside you at all times. People who have grown up this way get it. They're like, well, you can't rebel because it just doesn't work. Like, there is nowhere to go. Like anything short of literally packing a bag and leaving, physically removing yourself from these people, wasn't enough. And at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I didn't know how to pack a bag and walk out on my entire family and start a life. I didn't know how to do that. Who does? Not having any siblings, not having any cousins, not having any aunts or uncles, not having a father, and being geographically dislocated, meaning that I went to school completely on the other side of town from where I live. So I didn't even have schoolmates whose houses I could go and knock on a door and, my mate's mum or dad might answer and say, hey, can I stay the night here? None of that. So I had no community. And that is really why I often refer to my family as being a cult, is that they had cut off the rest of society, and we just lived inside this microcosm of us. There was only the four of us. And so not having any contact with the outside world, not having a network or support system to fall back on, meant I really was out of options. So rebelling, like, do what? Do what? How? Still to this day, I can't imagine any rebellion or any act that I might have done that would have changed anything at all. In fact, it would have only, and I always intuited this, was that anything that you did to challenge these people, it was going to make life 10 times worse for you. It was never going to affect them. And this is kind of like, I'm not saying that every family member was a narcissist, but it's like one of these things that you get told when dealing with narcissists is that you can't shake them up. You can't grab them by the lapels and shake them and wake them up and get them to see your point of view. Every time you shake them, from their perspective, they're being victimized by you. And you just come across as crazier and crazier and crazier. And that's really what it was like with my grandparents and my mother growing up, is that they had no concept of, hey, any of this is strange, any of this is unusual, any of our expectations are unreasonable. And, I would point to things in my own way, but nothing worked, And so what I learned was really terrible. I learned to suppress and repress everything about myself. And I learned not to show anything. I learned not to show what I liked and what I didn't like. Because if I showed what I liked, I'd be judged one way or the other for it. If I showed what I didn't like, I'd be judged one way or the other for it. Everything would be evaluated. So I just learned to shut down. I shut myself down. And I learned compliance. I learned to shrug and to be passive and to go along with everything. And yeah, that's emasculating. It's embarrassing to say now. I feel like a coward. I feel horrible even admitting this, but it's what I learned to do. And I learned to live a double life. I learned to become um, masterfully deceptive, if only within myself, which is to say, I became really good at deceiving myself, tricking myself. Because that's the only person I affected at the end of the day. That's the only person who suffered any consequences was me. The other thing, just on the point of rebellion and standing up for yourself, when no one in your life models rebellion or models standing up for yourself or models how to set and maintain a healthy boundary, good luck. Good luck. My mother didn't rebel. She complied with her parents her entire life. And my father, when things got too hard, just ran away. So stand up for yourself, rebel? No. I didn't learn that lesson. So effectively, I learned to live a double life. I learned to be successful where I knew people were looking, and then to do what I wanted where I knew people weren't looking. So I became really good at sort of identifying, oh, that thing over here is important to them and I know they're watching that, so I'll do that, and then I'll go over here and do something else where I know they can't see me. And I just became a deceptive person, and I really don't like that about myself. I hate it. But only children learn to be deceptive, I think, quite naturally anyway, because in order to have privacy, you need to retreat a little bit further into yourself. It's very hard to get privacy as an only child, even with the best of parents. You're the sole focus of the whole child rearing operation. So you do have to be a little bit sneaky, unfortunately. So how does any of this have to do with passivity and indecision? And what is my passivity and indecision story? So some of you might be familiar with a term from psychology called derealization. And basically, that is a phenomenon where there's almost like a split between you, the inner you, the you of your mind and your heart, and then the you that is your physical body that walks through the world, and the split or the gap between those two things. And derealization is a feeling that life isn't real, that the things around you aren't real. And I think my interpretation or my use of the word in relation to my own experience is that life didn't feel real to me. The physical body went through the motions. It dealt with the family. It dealt with the pressures, the day-to-day stuff. It got chaperoned to school. It complied. It nodded. But then there was an inner me that didn't come along for any of that. There was an inner me that was almost watching the physical self, that I was sitting outside my own body, watching me move around the world. And that's actually been a really powerful tool as a writer, because I'm able to look at myself, if not objectively, then I can still look at myself subjectively, like as in I can view myself from another perspective, from outside. But in any case, what happened to me was my experiences and the pressure, the sort of oppressive, controlling environment I grew up in, with these really intense interfering grandparents and a mother who just was not really present at all emotionally in my life, and a father who was gone, it created this schism between my inner self and my physical self. So there was my body that went through the motions, like I say, and then there was my inner self who was just kind of like what is going on? But the two never integrated. There was never really a self. There was never really a coherent, singular, unified self. And increasingly, I just retreated into myself. I just went in further and further and further. And it really was like life wasn't happening to me. I saw life, it was almost like there was a screen, like a really thick glass wall always in front of me. And life was happening on the other side of it. But here in my chamber, inside myself, the inner me that was disconnected from the physical body, you know, he had no stake in the world. He took no part in the world. So when I left school at 18 and started at university, I did it without being present in myself, right? I genuinely didn't know who I was, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And this is because nobody knew me. I never had a serious, genuine, honest conversation with a single person. I never had any emotional chat, heart to heart, anything meaningful with a single family member. I had no siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles to confide in. And the person I presented as at school was really just a persona. It was a character that I had created, that I used to get myself through school. And when I finished school, I never spoke to anybody again that I'd gone to school with. I mean, there was one relationship I had, actually two, that lasted more than, lasted for a couple of years after school. But every single other person I had cut off within 6 months of leaving school, because I had no authentic relationships with anyone. The person or the persona that I was at school was entirely manufactured. It was this kind of bravado idiot, you know, who kind of took things not so seriously and hey, whatever, and was really into sports. But I just, and I never talked about anything. I never talked about a single thing about what was happening to me, what my family was like, nothing. Not ever, not once. And in fact, I remember somebody once saying to me, like, you never talk about your family. And, you know, I was like, well, I've got nothing to talk about. Bullshit. I had everything to talk about, but no, I wouldn't talk about it. I refused to talk about it. And that was my way of surviving. Again, I knew that I couldn't have the real conversations that needed to be had with my family. They weren't going to have them with me. There was no point. And so at 18, did I want to go to university? Did I want to go traveling and take a gap year like many of my classmates were doing? Did I want to get a job? Did I want to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Did I want to adopt a greyhound? Did I want to learn a new skill? Did I want to keep playing football or basketball? No idea. I hadn't developed any sense of desire because I had not developed or cultivated any feelings or thoughts of my own, ever. And I was so repressed and so used to complying to the whims and wishes of other people that when school ended, I shrugged. I just shrugged. My family decided that I was going to go to university, and I shrugged. They decided I was going to enroll in an arts course, and I shrugged. And I just kept shrugging. I just kept whatever. I don't know, whatever. And life went on. It just continued to escalate or to snowball through this total passivity, this total disconnection that I had created from myself. But as a result of that disconnection, I started to experience an extreme form of envy. I would see people around me who were making choices. They had decided to come to university. They wanted to be there. They were dressed in really cool clothes that they had obviously chosen. They were dating each other. People were making choices. And I didn't know how. And I felt so ashamed and so freakish and so angry that I was beside myself. I did not know what to do. And that led to further passivity and further indecision. And I'm going to stop the video here, and there's going to be a part 2. And I'm going to talk about my experiences at university and in a long-term relationship, and how not deciding and not being in the choices I was making, and I was making choices whether I thought I was or I wasn't. It was my choice not to make any choices, and I take responsibility for that. But I want to talk next time about what that passivity, what that disconnection from myself, what that robbed me of. And it robbed me of a lot. And I have a lot of regret. So, stay tuned. The very first episode of the podcast is coming out this Sunday, and I really hope you will watch it. Please subscribe to the channel. You can support the channel now through the Buy Me a Coffee link, and you can find ways to contact me and follow me on other social media, all linked down in the description field below. Thanks for watching this one. More to come. Stay tuned, subscribe.